Those sailors are now touching down in Dubai. This comes as the U.S. Central Command releases that video purporting to show Iran's Revolutionary Guard taking an unexploded mine off of one of those targeted ships. That, of course, adding to growing fears of a potential military conflict. A senior U.S. official telling Fox News that Iran also fired a missile at a U.S. drone that was flying near the scene of those ship attacks. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shawn.
And I'm Jillian Mealy, in for Arthel Neville. The Trump administration is weighing its options against Iran, though the country's foreign minister is denying any involvement in those attacks. Still, President Trump says he has no doubt that Iran is to blame.
Well, Iran did do it, and you know they did it because you saw the boat. I guess one of the mines didn't explode, and it's probably got essentially Iran written all over it. That was their boat, that was them, and they didn't want the evidence left behind.
National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is following all of this from our D.C. bureau. Jennifer, you've been busy today.
That's right, Jillian. We have new details of an incident we first reported last night about the U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone that was fired on by the Iranians on Thursday. A senior U.S. official tells me just minutes after the first distress call went out from the MV Altair tanker at 6:12 a.m. local time, the U.S. military moved an unmanned MQ-9 Reaper drone over the Altair. The drone arrived at 6:20 a.m. local time, 8 minutes after the first distress call went out. At 6:45 a.m. local time, prior to the second attack on the second tanker, a missile was fired at the U.S. drone on station over the Altair, a Norwegian-flagged ship. It missed. U.S. officials have assessed that the missile was a modified SA-7 surface-to-air missile fired from Iran's mainland. It was fired after the U.S. drone arrived on station to assist the Norwegian tanker. Separately, we have learned from U.S. officials that an American MQ-9 drone was shot down over Yemen by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in recent days. The British government has issued a statement blaming Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps for the tanker attacks this week, saying no other state or non-state actor could plausibly have been responsible. But the German government says it needs more evidence than the video released by U.S. Central Command, allegedly showing an Iranian boat removing an unexploded mine from the side of one of the damaged vessels. Iran says it plans to release the 23 sailors it detained from the MV Altair, but we have now learned that they have arrived in Dubai, so Iran did keep its word. But we are also learning from U.S. officials that they weren't rescued by Iran. I'm told they were forced into Iranian custody by an IRGC boat crew who surrounded the friendly ship that originally rescued them. Back to you, Jillian.
All right, Jennifer Griffin, live in Washington. Thank you.
And for more on this, let's bring in John Hanna. He's a former national security advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney and senior counselor at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. So, John, apparently, predictably, brazen again. That is Iran's behavior. Does this escalate, or do you think they'll pull it back?
Well, I think right now we're on a road to further escalation, Eric. I think in particular these firings on U.S. military drones is a major new development that so far has been unconfirmed by the U.S. government. But it's one thing to be attacking foreign oil tankers off the Straits of Hormuz. It's a whole nother ballgame to be attacking U.S. military assets directly, even unmanned systems. So I think this type of thing probably requires a much more forceful U.S. response.
What would that forceful U.S. response be? In September of 2016, during the campaign, President Trump, at a speech in Florida, was talking about all those Iranian boats, the small, swift crafts that are like gnats and mosquitoes that swarm around our Navy assets. And at that time, he said that we should, quote, shoot them out of the water. Do you think that something similar to that could be the reaction here?
I certainly think if the Iranians are going to be attacking the U.S. military directly, then that's a whole nother ballgame. And I think that unless you put a stop to that early and quickly, the way President Reagan did to the IRGC Navy back in 1988, putting half of its Navy boats to the bottom of the Gulf, and put a stop to the Iranian challenge to American shipping immediately. If you don't do that, this is only going to escalate further, and we'll have further provocations from the Iranians where they're beginning to come after American military personnel, not just military assets.
Yeah, well, look, they basically got to kidnap some of our personnel a few years ago when they took them off a boat that was disabled. You refer to the 1988 incident. That was the Samuel Adams, I think, a frigate hit an Iranian mine, and 4 days later, President Reagan did what you just said, sunk half the Navy. But now it's a far more sophisticated, different military power. You have the IRGC. This could potentially explode, critics fear, into a much broader conflict. And others are saying we just don't have the forces in the region to take on Iran.
Listen, that's possible, although, as we've seen over the last month, the United States has been augmenting its forces in this part of the world quite dramatically, and there's now talk that General McKenzie at CENTCOM is requesting another 6,000 troops, perhaps 2 additional fighter squadrons, some more anti-ballistic missile defenses. So the United States is quite capable of inflicting a very, very heavy price on Iran, in addition to everything that we can still do to isolate them diplomatically, hit them economically, and as well as covert operations, particularly in terms of cyber warfare. But we've got to make sure that the Iranians don't get comfortable in that sweet spot, that gray zone of being able to attack American interests with violence, but just beneath the threshold of the kind of activity that would automatically trigger an American military response. Because if we allow that to happen without imposing real price on the Iranians, this will just lead to precisely the kind of war that we're seeking to avoid so badly.
What if the others say, look, it's a drone, they can shoot it. Drones, you're not dealing with human life there. But that could now cause a new policy that we escort these tankers. The U.S. Navy protects them like we did during the 1980s, during the so-called tanker wars.
I think that's certainly an option if you've got enough ships in the area that you can do that. Otherwise, I think you've got to do what we should be doing anyway, which is getting Gina Haspel, apolitical CIA senior officials, as well as our top military brass, over to Europe, over to the Arabian Gulf, over to Japan and Asia, to get them actually participating in something like a naval escort, getting their ships engaged here as well. So it's a true international response that isolates the Iranians and lets them know that they are not going to be allowed to get away with this kind of activity that threatens the oil of the entire world, that fuels the entire global economy, with impunity.
And finally, the international community is now speaking out against this. Britain, of course, France and others, as well as our Arab Sunni allies. Do you think that coalition should include the UAE and other states that are in the region to send Tehran a blunt and lasting message?
Of course, everybody's got to be involved. All of our top Asian allies, the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese. Chinese have a huge stake in keeping the Straits of Hormuz open, keeping a lid on the price of oil. They've got to have some skin in this game, too, if they don't want to see a catastrophic war that will send the price of oil through the roof. We've all got to get together and make it absolutely clear to the mullahs in Tehran that they're not going to be able to play this game with the world community and the global economy.
It certainly seems, because of the tougher sanctions, that Tehran is running scared. John Hanna, the Foundation of the Defense of Democracies, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Eric.
And by the way, we'll be talking a lot more about this tomorrow. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be the guest with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. Certainly, this will be the major topic of tomorrow's program.
Looking forward to that. Certainly don't want to miss it. But in the meantime, President Trump talking up the economy, an issue he sees as one of his strongest selling points as he gets ready to launch his 2020 campaign in Florida on Tuesday. The president tweeting, quote, "The Trump economy is setting records and has a long way up to go. However, if anyone but me takes over in 2020, I know the competition very well, there will be a market crash the likes of which has not been seen before. Keep America great." Garrett Tenney is live from the White House with more on that. Good Saturday to you, Garrett.
Jillian, good afternoon to you. The president today is also touting the strength of his poll numbers ahead of the official launch of his re-election campaign, saying that his poll numbers now are better than they were in 2016 when he won the election. And this, of course, comes on the heels of reports this week that internal campaign polling back in March found that former Vice President Joe Biden was leading President Trump in several key battleground states. And the Trump campaign isn't pushing back on these polls themselves and isn't disputing whether or not they did in fact find that. But they are saying that the president is explaining, the Trump campaign is saying that these leaked numbers are ancient in campaign terms from months-old polling that began in March before two major events had occurred, pointing to the completion of the Mueller investigation, as well as Democratic candidates beginning to lay out their progressive messages. And the president is also, ahead of his official launch of his campaign, trying to clarify comments that he made this week in an interview with George Stephanopoulos, suggesting that there was nothing wrong with listening to information from foreign governments on his political opponents, and saying at one point he would not report those efforts to the FBI. Well, on Fox and Friends Friday, the president tried to clarify his statement, but defended it and explained that he would report those efforts if he thought anything that he received was incorrect or badly stated.
And of course you have to look at it, because if you don't look at it, you're not going to know if it's bad. How are you going to know if it's bad? But of course you give it to the FBI or report it to the Attorney General or somebody like that. But of course you do that. You couldn't have that happen with our country, and everybody understands that.
The president's still gotten a lot of blowback for his initial comments, and his political rivals are pouncing on them as well, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who said this incident is another piece of evidence that President Trump believes he is above the law.
It's a very sad thing that he does not know right from wrong. I believe that he has been involved in a criminal cover-up.
Yeah, today the president is over at Trump International Golf Club for his birthday weekend ahead of the official launch of his campaign re-election. And that's going to be Tuesday night at a rally in Orlando, Florida. And Florida, of course, one of several key battleground states that the president is going to be focusing on, spending a lot of time in over the next year. His campaign says he needs to win those same key swing states that he won in 2016 if he wants to win again in 2020, Jillian.
And so it begins, or continues. Yeah. Garrett, thank you very much.
You got it.
And there's the music. You know what that means. Speaking of the 2020 campaign, while a lot of the Democratic candidates are in Charleston, South Carolina today, they are attending the Black Economic Alliance Forum. You know that Palmetto State is home to the first Southern primary, and African-American voters make up the majority of the Democratic electorate in that state. Jonathan Seri is there in Charleston covering it all, where the contenders are trying to make a bid for that block. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Eric, that forum going on as we speak. Elizabeth Warren speaking inside. Meanwhile, outside, the candidates have been participating in various campaign events. Just moments ago, you had South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg leading a pro-union rally through the streets of historic downtown Charleston. You also had Beto O'Rourke reiterating his support for reparations to the descendants of African slaves brought over to America, helping to build this country. He met yesterday, O'Rourke did, with members of the Gullah Geechee community on the coast of South Carolina. South Carolina's Democratic primary will be an important early indicator of the African-American vote, because in this state, black Democrats outnumber white Democrats by a 2-to-1 margin.
In general, people who vote in the Democratic primary tend to be more liberal than your average voter, but that's just not the case in South Carolina. The Democratic voters in South Carolina are much more moderate, so they're going to be listening for cues about the economic policies of the Democratic Party, much more so than the social policies.
I should also mention that New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is also participating in this forum. A total of 4 Democratic presidential contenders campaigning in a state that for years has voted solidly red in presidential elections.
It presents a real challenge when a candidate comes in the state and says that African Americans aren't succeeding under President Trump, when unemployment's at a record low under this president and this administration. They need to explain that, and I don't think they can.
The mood of the country is different, the mood of our party is different, and the urgency to ensure we get across the finish line first to take back that temporary public housing unit we know as the White House is totally different than it was in 2008.
So while Democrats may be unlikely to turn South Carolina blue in 2020, the party is expected to play a pivotal role, the primary here in South Carolina, in narrowing this very crowded Democratic field. Eric?
All right, Jonathan, thanks so much. Jillian?
There are new details about the side deal between the U.S. and Mexico to slow the flow of migrants to the southern border. This as two top officials in the Trump administration have a warning for Congress about the crisis. Will lawmakers listen? More news on that next.
Deal Mexico has agreed to take in order to stop the continuing flow of migrants to the U.S. southern border. Mexico published that agreement. It was signed on June 7th. So what's in it? And will it work? Jeff Paul, live in our Los Angeles bureau with that. Hi, Jeff.
Eric, the supplementary agreement includes several key provisions between the U.S. and Mexico. It calls for, quote, burden sharing and the assignment of responsibility for processing refugee claims. Also under the terms, if the United States determines at its discretion and after consultation with Mexico after 45 days that the measures implemented by Mexico haven't adequately achieved results in addressing the flow of migrants, then Mexico will take all necessary steps under domestic law to bring the agreement into force. All of this coming weeks after the president threatened to impose tariffs on Mexico if changes weren't made. This deal would help avoid those tariffs for Mexico.
Tariffs are, in fact, a way to put pressure on countries to do the right thing. And again, all we're asking Mexico to do is do the right thing. Be a true border security partner so that we can actually have the security in our nation that we need.
The side agreement also ensures Mexico will work toward becoming a safe third country, meaning persons seeking refugee status must make their claim in the first country they arrive in, and Mexico could be included in that now. Former acting ICE Director Tom Homan called the side agreement a historic occasion for President Trump.
They're going to expand the migrant protection protocol where people wait in Mexico for their hearings. They're sending National Guard to help secure the border and to attack the criminal cartels, both their transportation infrastructure and their financial infrastructure. This is a great deal, and this is a game changer if this implemented correctly and the Mexicans follow through on their commitment.
Homan also spoke about the president's announcement yesterday naming him border czar. He says it was premature, but that he has talked to the administration, but has not accepted any position just yet. Eric?
All right, Jeff. Thanks so much. Jillian?
Meanwhile, the alarm bell ringing on the southern border even louder as money to address the crisis is quickly running out. The Secretaries of Health and Human Services and Homeland Security writing a letter to Congress this week stressing the severity of the crisis, asking for more money.
The timing is immediate. We are out of money. We will not have the money to continue to run this program where we take care of children who come into this country by themselves illegally. They're given to us to care for them. By the end of this month or early next month, we will have no money, and we've already had to take drastic measures to protect their life and safety with what little money we have left.
Now let's bring in Natalie Andrews, congressional reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you for your time this Saturday. We certainly appreciate it. So what do you think? Will they get the money that they need? Will they get any more of it?
Both Democrats and Republicans say they want to get some sort of border supplemental package passed before Congress leaves for the July 4th recess. So that's progress in a way, because they were not on the same terms 2 weeks ago when Congress passed a disaster relief bill. At that point, they couldn't quite agree, and so they tossed out the border security supplemental and just passed disaster relief. So now both sides are at least saying they want to get something done.
Yeah, but will it get done? Do you think? Do they agree enough?
Immigration, as you know, bedevils Congress every year over and over. So it's hard to tell. It seems as if the money is focused on humanitarian aid and less so on immigration and customs enforcement, there could be an agreement here. Appropriations chairmen and ranking members from both parties on all four corners say they want to get it done. But I mean, your guess is as good as mine. We know that this issue bedevils Congress all the time.
On Monday, we talked about this on Fox and Friends First earlier this week. The health department reported having fewer than 700 free beds. And you look at that number, 700 free beds, compared to Homeland Security reporting 1,900 children earlier this week ready to be transferred. These kids are ready to be transported. There's not enough beds for them. Obviously, this is a crisis. And I think at this point in time, most people on both sides agree this is a crisis. But you wonder if anything's going to get done before 2020, because at this point, we could potentially see people on the left flip-flopping now to say this is a crisis. We need to do something.
Yeah, I mean, Speaker Nancy Pelosi agrees that something should be done. Nita Lowey, the appropriations chair, they say that they want to get something done as long as it's focusing on humanitarian aid. An increase in beds is really hard for Democrats. They see that as changing immigration policy and allowing more people to be detained for longer in the future. They feel like every time they fund a bed that it shifts how immigration policy and asylum claims are handled. So it will really depend on the makeup of the immigration package. And Senate Republicans are set to take up something in the Judiciary Committee this week. So there's a chance that Senate Republicans, they're further ahead on this process. So they could take up the bill and send it to the House right before the House leaves for recess, and the House will have to choose whether or not they take up the bill passed by the Senate or they don't do something before the recess.
We will certainly see about that. Meantime, you know that there was a Fox News town hall with Julian Castro, and he had a little bit to say about President Trump failing on immigration. Listen to this, and then we'll get your reaction.
If you think about it for a second, when he came into office, Donald Trump said that he was going to solve this, as he put it, this immigration problem. And he's completely failed. About 100 people are in the 100-degree heat of El Paso, Texas, underneath a bridge, being fenced in and kept like animals together without the ability to shower or to change clothes for a whole month. That is the failure that this president has been on the issue of immigration.
Is that fair?
It seems much more complicated than that. People are coming to the border to seek asylum because of the problems in the Northern Triangle countries, and they are running into problems. We do see these asylum claims jump every summer, and now building a wall does not help these asylum claims. So focusing on that, as Democrats will point to, is not helpful. But there's a long-standing issue of Congress not addressing immigration on both sides. And a lot of lawmakers will point to that as the reason why we continue to see problems here.
All right, Natalie Andrews, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Jillian.
And still ahead, several impeach Trump rallies are in full swing today. But who exactly is behind them? Did you know that officials say Illinois was hacked by the...
I hope you're having a good day. Welcome back. Today, there are impeach Trump rallies taking place all across the country. A live look at this one here just outside of Chicago. The event's organized by Move On and other left activist organizations. And another one of those demonstrations just wrapped up right here in New York City. Let's get to Jackie Heinrich in downtown Manhattan. Jackie, what do people have to say today?
You know, Jillian, top of mind for these folks who came out was obstruction. That was what most people came out here for. It wrapped up about a half an hour ago. About 300 people showed up. There was one counter-protester who made a lot of noise by herself. It's one of 7 rallies happening across the country in major cities, and as many as 140 cities had some kind of a similar, smaller event. The group behind it consists of several smaller groups like Black Lives Matter and the New York Immigrant Coalition. They called today a National Day of Local Action. Their website points to the Mueller report as conclusive evidence that the president obstructed justice and told his subordinates to do the same. They organized this rally to pressure Democratic leadership to begin an impeachment inquiry. The issue of obstruction made headlines again this week after the president's interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, in which the president was asked about whether he instructed former White House counsel Don McGahn to fire Robert Mueller. But it was his comments on taking dirt from an opponent that spurred New York Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney to show up here today.
Basically inviting them in. You know, if you send me the information, thank you, I'll read it. So basically saying I don't mind if you're influencing as long as you're helping my reelection. That's clearly wrong.
A recent Quinnipiac poll showed 61% of people were opposed to impeachment, with 33% in favor. That being said, the same poll was nearly split on a question as to whether Congress should investigate to determine whether or not to impeach, with 48% in favor and 49% against. There's at least one counter-protester out here that did make some noise. Aside from that, it was peaceful, no arrests, and it's over for today. Similar rallies happening in other cities. Jillian?
That's right, Jackie Heinrich. Thank you.
Well, Senate Republicans under fire for blocking legislation to protect the U.S. from election interference. You know, several Senate bills were made to beef up election protection and better defend our democracy from foreign hacking and interference like we saw in 2016. But Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the feds are already helping states and local election officials on that. The government says one state the Russians did target in 2016 was Illinois. So I went there to find out if that state is better prepared for 2020. Let's take a look. To most people, this is the mundane sound of a keyboard. But in this room, it signals the defense of our democracy. This is the computer server room of the Sangamon County, Illinois Board of Elections. And like similar state and local election offices across the country, these computers are the new battlefield in defending against threats to our election system. It sounds like a war.
Absolutely. You know, we're at the front lines of ensuring that the protections to the integrity of our elections is first at hand.
Cyber threats are reality, and take it seriously. I mean, what happened to us, it was bad, but it could have been a heck of a lot worse.
During the 2016 presidential election, Illinois was hit by a foreign force, the Russians. Authorities say they breached the state's voter registration rolls, the records of 76,000 voters, more than 14,000 in the small city of Galesburg in the central part of the state.
It was a wake-up call.
Stephen Sandvoss is the executive director of the Illinois State Board of Elections.
We never thought that, you know, this is something that it was going to happen to us. Well, it did, and it could happen again.
To face that threat, the state created what it calls the Cyber Navigator Program, specially trained computer experts called navigators who are on guard for election hacking across the state in all 102 counties 24/7. Most of the funding comes from Washington, part of the $380 million earmarked for election protection. Illinois' cut just over $13 million.
It sounds like the Cyber Navigators are like a computer commando squad.
In a sense, yes. I mean, they're the front line of defense. They do risk assessment testing. They do spear phishing assessments. Their job is to discover what vulnerabilities exist in the system.
This program and the federal government's assistance and the state's persistence in focusing on cyber protections of our elections has really opened up the doors for us to detect, protect, and defend our apparatus of elections.
While less than 10% of states took advantage of the federal funding at first, more are signing on. They recognize, like those here in Illinois who experienced the hacking, that cyber threats to the election system are very real.
The Illinois example is a great example of what's possible with additional federal money.
Larry Norden, an election security expert at the New York University Brennan Center for Justice, says still more needs to be done.
The fact of the matter is, running elections costs money. So if we're going to do it right, I believe we're going to have to spend a few $100 million a year to protect our elections. That's less than the Pentagon recently spent in a year on military bans. I think that we can afford to do that to secure our elections.
Are you confident that this system is safe?
I'm feeling more confident than we were before in the past. But again, this is going to be forever a vigilant activity of ours.
No matter how sophisticated your defenses are, I think there's hackers out there that can find a way around it.
But are you confident that we're better off today than we were 2 years ago?
I believe we are, yes.
We're not going to allow this to thwart the confidence of our foundations of our framers. We take it serious, and we will work hard in its defense in making sure that we have great elections.
Well, meanwhile, election bills in the Senate include the Election Security Act, Defending Elections from Threats, and the Secure Elections Act, all awaiting a vote. The House, by the way, has earmarked $600 million more for election security, all to try to face the threat that still exists. And officials expect we will be attacked again in the upcoming election. But Illinois, as you see, says its cyber navigators are ready. Jillian?
Now let's talk about something that has a lot of people shaken as the mystery deepens. Another American dies on vacation in the Dominican Republic. Her family now demanding answers after being told the 53-year-old woman suffered a heart attack. This as prosecutors lay out a timeline for the investigation into the shooting of former Boston Red Sox star David Ortiz. Steve Harrigan has more from Santo Domingo, and people in the United States are worried. People in the Dominican probably upset because he's such a star there. He's beloved.
He is a national hero here, Jillian, you're right, in the Dominican Republic. So much so that when these 9 suspects, who now can be held for a year as the investigation continues, as they are taken to jail, and they're put in 4 different kinds of jails, the police have actually had to put them in armor, in armored helmets and armored vests. That's because people are trying to get at them, to hit them or to hurt them, such as the anger here over the shooting of David Ortiz. They've got 9. Number 10 is still on the run. They're going to hold him for a year. The prosecutor says by next week they should have the answers for who ordered this hit on David Ortiz and why. 2 of the suspects also wanted for violent crimes in the U.S. As far as Ortiz himself, he continues his recovery in a Boston hospital. Friends and family say he is sitting up, eating soup, and watching Red Sox games, so out of any threat of losing his life from that single gunshot. As far as the families go here, more and more are beginning to investigate or call for investigations of people who have died suddenly here, American tourists in the Dominican Republic. That number stands at 8 now. Jerry Curran, 78 years old, is the latest. His family has come forward saying he was here in January at a resort. He had dinner and a drink, and 3 days later he was dead. 5 months later, his daughter says the family is still looking for answers.
I see a lot of links. My dad's death certificate listed 4 causes of death, and one of them was pulmonary edema. And that seemed to be popping up in a lot of the other cases. So I was seeing a connection there.
Officials from the Dominican Republic are pushing back against such claims, saying there is no connection between those 8 deaths, but also they say they are investigating each of those incidents. Jillian, back to you.
It just has so many people worried, wondering, should I take my vacation? What's going to come next? Steve, thank you so much for keeping us updated. Eric?
It is heartbreaking and chilling. Well, meanwhile, there's been an arrest after a former Arkansas state legislator was found dead in her home. And wait till you hear who they now have in custody. Also, Hong Kong's government trying to defuse a political crisis there. But will it be enough to stop some of the biggest protests seen there in decades? We'll have all those details.
Ryan?
Hi, Jillian. This is a very big climb down from the government in Hong Kong, postponing this bill that would have allowed people in Hong Kong, which is part of China but has its own political system, to be extradited to China. Now, over the last week, people in Hong Kong have made it abundantly clear they simply don't like this bill. On Wednesday, we had violent clashes between the police and young protesters. At one point, the demonstrators blockading a government building simply to prevent the politicians from going into the building where they could debate this bill. And then if you roll back the tape a bit further to Sunday, 1 million people on the streets of Hong Kong. The entire population of Hong Kong, just so you know, is 7.4 million. So 1 out of 7 people on the streets in the biggest demonstrations since 1997 there. What's the big deal? Well, obviously, if people from Hong Kong can be extradited to mainland China, then they can be tried in mainland Chinese courts, which clearly the people of Hong Kong don't trust just yet. Now, where does this all go from here? There is another demonstration planned for tomorrow. It was planned even before the climb down, but the protesters say they're going to go ahead with it because they're not happy with this bill simply being postponed, being suspended. They want it scrapped altogether, and many of them say, Jillian, that they also want the head of the government in Hong Kong to resign. Jillian?
That 1 out of 7 people, wow, that really hammers it home. Ryan Chilcote, thank you.
Now, she worked to elect her and allegedly killed her. Arkansas State Police arresting 48-year-old Rebecca Lynn O'Donnell in connection with the killing of former Republican State Senator Linda Collins Smith there. A former communications director for Collins says the 2 women were friends and that O'Donnell was a campaign staffer who worked on her campaign. Investigators say the lawmaker was found dead outside her home in Pocahontas, Arkansas on June 4th. Criminal charges against O'Donnell are pending now, police not giving a motive yet. Wondering how to keep the kids engaged during their summer vacation? We'll tell you about one place where school children from across the country and around the world run the show, and they learn from each other in the process. You want to hear about that when we come back.
We are getting word of breaking news now about a ground stoppage at Newark Airport after a plane blew a tire. The airport tweeting that passengers safely deplaned and delays are expected. So if you have a flight this evening, make sure you check on that. We will have more on this as we get it. Eric?
Well, Jillian, summer vacation is at hand for millions of school children, as you know. But you know, that doesn't mean they have to take a break from learning. And if parents might be wondering how their kids will be spending their free time instead of just on the internet all the time, there's one option to help keep them busy by channeling their creativity, broadening their horizons, and connecting them with their peers across the country and even around the world. It's called Kid Spirit. And Kid Spirit is an online magazine and community by and for 11 to 17-year-olds. It's published kids from small towns and big cities here in the U.S. and 26 other countries, including India, Pakistan, China, Nepal, Haiti, Paraguay. The kids drive the content, and it's all done in an interactive environment that they say is safe and respectful. Joining us now is Kid Spirit's founding editor and executive director, Elizabeth Dabney Hochman. Elizabeth, it sounds like a great idea. So instead of just like playing Pac-Man or, I mean, that's an old game, you know, Death Card and what the kids do, actually something that is meaningful and creative. How did it start?
Well, thank you. It's been an amazing journey. Originally, when my older daughter was 11 years old, I was looking for media options for her, and I felt that there should be something that would be give kids a chance to take a bit more ownership of the content. And so I thought that when kids work together in collaboration, they respect each other a good deal. They like hearing from their peers about things are important, but that rarely happens. So we thought we would try and gather a bunch of kids together and see if they wanted to create an online magazine. And what happened was the kids ran with it. So they came up with all the important things, the mission statement, the tagline, and for over a year, they were creating content before we'd published anything.
What do they do?
Passion.
What type of content? What do they report? Do they write? Are there essays?
There are essays. They write feature articles, media reviews, poetry, artwork, and now that we can do it, video. So from the very beginning, there was an outpouring of interest, and what's really different is that the kids are leading the content. They decide what the content is, and they work on it. They collaboratively edit it over time before it gets published. So it's really a very process-oriented publication.
And it seems like a very safe site because it is the kids. You're not going to have any creepos out there.
No creepos.
And besides not having the creepos, they get to be creative.
Yes.
They get to perhaps follow a profession into journalism or writing, or at least being engaged in the world and with each other around the globe.
That's right. And it's for kids, even say in 6th grade, they're going to be able to have an experience and get to know kids who are older, maybe 14, 15, and 17-year-olds. It stretches them in amazing ways to have substantive conversation with each other about topics they care about. So over the years, they've covered maybe 44 themes. For example, something like heritage, resilience, and right now we're doing a whole issue on fear and anxiety, which I know kids really care about.
That is so important. They're too young for 9/11, but with everything going on in the world, that is so important, and it's such a widespread issue.
It is, and this fall we're doing an issue on education. So they choose these topics, and they create the content, and before it's published, they go back and forth on it with quite a bit of depth, so that wherever we encourage kids, no matter where they are, no matter what age they are, what kind of educational experience they're having, they can push themselves to improve in conversation with their peers, which is very empowering.
And if you're a kid sitting at home and you can connect, tell me some of the stories of kids being connected to their peers around the other side of the world.
Amazing. We do collaborative features. For example, we'll take, for our education issue, we have kids who are from all over the country, and we're pairing them together so they can ask each other and kids around the world, what is your educational environment like? What's your school like? What do you learn? What are the expectations about an education? And then over time, they really get to know the person they're paired with. We've had a kid who's nonverbal, who has a very serious illness, cerebral palsy. He's able, with our organization, to have a very enriching experience, and not just for him, but for the kids who get to know him in that way.
Oh, that is
We've
so
had
wonderful.
kids from different backgrounds and traditions, India and Pakistan, for example, collaborating on articles to get to know each other in ways that they normally would not.
Absolutely not, especially with that riff. Finally, quickly,
Yes.
for the parents and grandparents out there who want to know how to get involved, what do you do?
You go to our website, kidspiritonline.com. There is a Get Involved section so that any child who wants to get involved, we have an open submission process. You just read it. You can send us an email. If a child would like to get involved and start their own editorial board, they're more than welcome to do that. And if they're inspired by our work, we are a not-for-profit, so we would welcome their donations and support as well.
All right, Kid Spirit Online. There's your mission, Mom and Dad and Grandpa and Grandma. Get at it for the kids this summer. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back.